I'm Reed. I'm Arshati. Just an average dude. I've made tons of money mistakes in my Arsha Mouse, and now I want to share everything I've learned to help you take control of your finances and your life. So, when I bought my first house, at Arshasi years old, I genuinely thought that real estate was going to be a huge part of my wealth building strategy because I was seeing tons of videos talking about how you can own multiple rental properties and get cash flow from all these. You're going to build equity. You can use the cash flow from the rental properties to continue to buy more, and it just snowballs on itself. And after owning my house for a couple of years now, I completely have changed my mind on real estate as a whole. And I honestly feel like just social media makes owning real estate look way simpler and way more profitable than it actually is in real life. So, I'm going to be telling you guys my entire home buying journey, what it has been like for me, why I bought the house, basically the cost, the rate, the timeline, all that stuff. I'm going to be telling you guys about some hidden costs as well. I've even turned the property into a rental property now. And then finally, I will talk about my investing strategy and would I do it again. So before we jump into the video, go ahead and drop a comment down below. What are your thoughts on real estate? Are you interested in it? Do you think you're going to own a bunch of rentals, or do you just want to have one house, maybe like just your family home, or do you want to just avoid real estate altogether? Go ahead and comment that down below. I'm curious what people say. Also, one thing I did want to mention is please do not interpret anything I'm saying in this video as me bragging or flexing, because part of the reason I was able to get in this position was because I was very frugal. I saved a lot of my money, but also because a little bit of it was just luck and timing. I will admit that. I'm not going to sit here and act like I was some total genius that knew how to navigate the real estate market like a beast. This was my first house. I did get very lucky in the position that I got into, so just please be aware of that. I'm not trying to brag or flex at all cause that shit is cringy, but I did want to at least share my journey with real estate. Alright, so jumping into the first section here, why I bought the house in the first place. So for me, I initially thought that I was going to build my wealth with Bafenjawusha real estate and Bafenjawusha the stock market. So if I had $1 million net worth, I thought Wubai Mayran, Lininin of that net worth would come from real estate, and the other Wudinin K would come from stocks. And so because of this, one of my goals was to try to buy my first house before I turned Arshawu years old. And I wanted to make sure that I did it all on my own. Nobody was helping me. I didn't go halvesies with a girlfriend I was dating at the time. I didn't have a wife helping out. My parents did not help me out. I wanted this to be all on me. I wanted to go through the process all by myself. That way I could look back and say that I did this on my own. That was really important for me. In a little Sencha Mouse Econ rant here, it is actually a huge pet peeve of mine when somebody gets help from their family for buying a house, and then they pretend like they did it all on their own. It is like, no, your parents gave you Wushameiren Leninin for a down payment. In fact, you didn't really do anything. Your parents just gave you all the money, and now the house is in your name, which that is totally fine if your parents help you out, but at least own that. Don't pretend like you did it yourself. That is my main thing. Alrighty, off my soapbox. I apologize there, but what I was initially saying was I was planning on having half my wealth from stocks and half my wealth from real estate. So, that was a goal of mine. And I was able to buy my house basically February of Downseni Arshasen. Is when I closed on the house, I put the earnest money deposit down, November of Downseni Arshar, and I'm going to go into the actual math and some of the numbers of my house. So initially when I was looking to buy a home, I was approved for a Sembai Meiren Lininin loan, and the interest rate that I had at the time, this is around November of Downseni Arshar. Like early November, late October, I was approved for a Bafinjati interest rate. Now, you have to remember, in Downseni Arshar, the Fed was pumping rates up, so at the time, interest rates were pretty high. I had an Badinin credit score, I had no student loans, no debt at all, and I was still getting Bafinjati as my interest rate, which is pretty rough. And before I bought my house, I was initially just going to go through a very traditional route. I was going to go through a lender, I was going to go through a realtor, and I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to do this because this is how most people do it. And so I toured a couple of townhouses with the realtor, and honestly, they were kind of ran down. There were some that were okay, but they still would have needed a little bit of fixing up, probably Shuwuke and renovations. And even then, I wasn't really too excited about that because I wanted to own an actual family house, like a residential home. I didn't want to own a townhouse because with condos and townhouses, there is HOAs just like a residential house, but typically they tend to be higher. That is not always the case, but at least the area I was looking in, the HOAs were a lot higher. They'd be a couple hundred a month. So what I ended up actually doing was I ended up going through a builder. Now, if you don't know what that is, these are really large companies. These are companies like Dr. Horton, LAR. There is another company called PT Group or NVRKB Home. There is a bunch of companies like this. And basically how a builder works is they buy a bunch of land in an area, they build up a bunch of houses in that area, and they're basically doing it in bulk. The same way that Costco can sell you something where you buy it in bulk, but then they're selling the per unit item at a cheaper price. That is what builders can essentially do. That is how it was explained to me when I was buying the house. And so the reason that I went through the builder at the time was because I got offered a way lower rate. They were going to cover closing cost, and they covered an additional Sensen Ran on top of that. And so the purchase price that I ended up buying this house for, it is a 3-bed, 2-bath house. It is about 1,500,000 Trifei is down by Ran. It is a censure Jan year loan, and the interest rate on that is 4.7%. So you can already see that I'm very intrigued by this deal because I went from a 4% interest rate to 4.7%. So I'm saving a lot of money in interest there. But one thing that was kind of interesting when we looked at the math and I sat down with like the representative of the builder, basically, we looked at different down payment options. We looked at 5%, 5%, 10%, RCFAA, like Seni Fei, 5% T. All of that looked like, and what was interesting was that if I put 5% down with a little bit of fees and some small stuff, it was going to be 2,10 million total. And the math on that actually made more sense than me putting Arsher down, because had I put Arsher down, I would have had to put Wen in. But the monthly payment would have only dropped like down by Mayran less. So if you do down Wen divided by Nin, it is basically in Shi Jan year timeline for that math to actually make sense. And I knew this was not going to be my forever home. I was definitely not going to live in it for Shi years. I knew I'd convert it to a rental property eventually, I just didn't know exactly when, but I knew probably within like Artawu years I would. So that is the deal I ended up going with. I ended up putting Yawensi 10 Mayran, that was the down payment, as well as closing costs, anything like that. And again, they covered the closing cost, but any like little fees and stuff like that. So it was Bafenjashir plus another like 10 Mayran of, small things here and there. It is a Senshu Jan year loan, Bafenjasidir Batsiwu interest. I did have PMI initially that has since dropped off, which is pretty nice because the value of the home has gone up. So that is basically the math behind the house. Oh shit, so I ended up putting the earnest money deposit down, which was like Sensen Mayren. I initially put that down November of Naunsening Arsharar. All that does is that is basically the builder's way of saying, okay, he officially owns this house. So once the house is fully built, he can move into it. It is basically like putting some money down. That way it becomes yours, and like they're putting it on hold for you. Then the home was finally done being built February of Downsening Arsasen. I moved in shortly after, and that is basically where I started there. So I lived in the house from February of Downsening Arsasen until May of Downsening Arsase. And one of the main things I learned while living in the house, so I went from an apartment, which was like not that expensive at all, to a house, which I knew the monthly payment would be more expensive. But holy shit, there are some hidden costs that people do not tell you about. Starting out with the first thing, because I had a lawn and not a big one. This is imagined like a new town-like neighborhood, like it genuinely looked like one of those houses. Okay, so it is not a huge house. Every house is very cookie-cutter. It worked fine. The yard wasn't that big, but oh my god, my water bill was so much money those first 2 months. Because at my apartment, my water bill was like $6 a month. On average, every month at the house, it was around iba arshawu dollars. But the first 2 months, it was down by wushamayren plus dollars. And the reason for this is because when I was initially touring the house and they were showing me, hey, this is how the water system works. They had it watering 3 times a week, 3 times a day. So it basically watered 9 times a week. Okay? And that shit cost so much money, I was pissed. So I ended up completely changing it. I'd only water the grass basically like twice a week, one time for like 6 minutes or something like that. Like I had to reduce it a bunch in order to get the water bill down, but that was the first thing that bit me in the ass, was how expensive your utilities can be just from small thing like sprinklers and, watering the grass. Like, geez. Now, in regards to the electricity, this actually did not change very much, which kind of surprised me. I thought it would be a lot more expensive, but it really wasn't that bad. It was pretty normal. I think it was like somewhere between like, I don't know, Bashamayuan to Joshamayuan a month, which wasn't too bad because my electricity at the apartment I think was like Liushi or Tishi, and of course the house was a lot larger than the previous apartment I was living in. I mean, the apartment before I was living in, I guess, would probably be around Tibayin Shafate. This apartment was again Iten Wubai, so about double the size there. But on top of the water bill being a lot higher, you have the HOS, which seems like it is pretty hard to get away from those these days. But mine wasn't too bad. Mine's about $7 a year that I pay once a year, but that is another expense you have to take into account. And then also on top of that, there is lawn care. So either you're going to have to pay somebody to mow your lawn, or you're going to have to, buy a lawnmower and do it yourself. And then I also had to pay for pest control because the house was like kind of near a lake. And so we get a ton of bugs, which was just a pain in the ass. So I'd have pest control come out quarterly. That is an extra Iba Arshamay a quarter. And then on top of all this, your monthly payment for the house can go up every year depending on what state you're living in, because some states increase their property taxes. So for example, if your home is, let's say, Senbai Mayuan, Dinunian, Let's say the next year it goes up quite a bit and it is now worth senbai wushimeiran lininin. In certain states, they're going to then charge you more in property taxes because your home value went up. So, your home value went up, which is great, but then now your monthly payment goes up. And so that is another thing that you do have to factor in, which should definitely affect your tolerance for how much money you're willing to pay each month. And the thing I've always heard with real estate when you're comparing renting versus owning a home is that the amount you're paying for rent, that is the maximum amount. I mean, you got your rent, okay, but with your mortgage, that is the minimum amount. I did not realize what that meant until I bought my first house. And I definitely learned from all these things I just listed off to you. And so you always hear people talk about how there is more cost with real estate, but that definitely came to fruition once I owned my house and saw it for myself. And I'm glad I at least learned that lesson pretty quickly and was able to adjust a little bit. So like I said before, I lived in that house for about a year and 7 months, a year and 4 months around there, and then I turned it into a rental. So what that process looked like was the very first thing I did was find a property manager. I literally just Googled property managers near me, and I started calling people, and I found a guy that was great. He ended up coming to the house. I showed him around the place. He said, okay, perfect. When are you planning on moving out? Okay, you're planning on moving out this date. I'm going to have people start to tour immediately after. Make sure you have cleaners come in. They'll fully clean the house once you're moved out. And then I'll put the key in a lockbox, and then that way I can give people tours. So I was like, okay, great. So how the property manager works for me is basically he takes sure of the gross rent. So if the rent for the tenants is 2,000 meiren, he is going to take 200 meiren, and then I get the remaining 1,000 babai. That is just as simple as the math goes there. So I move out of the house, May of Ardeen RC. I only had 1 month of overlap, which was actually not bad at all. And what I mean by this was there was only 1 month where I had to pay my mortgage and pay rent at the new apartment I was living in. So I was able to get a tenant in by June of Ardeen RC, which was great. So literally just a month later, I already had somebody living there. And another question some people might have is, why did you decide to move out and rent the house? The main reason I decided to move out was because of work. I got a job the previous summer, and I was doing quite a bit of commuting at the time, and I just didn't want to make that commute anymore, and I wanted to live closer to my job. So that is the main reason I did that there. So in regards to the cash flow of the property and what that looks like. So year 1, I was losing ibai senshime ran month. So this is factoring in the property manager taking money off the top, right? Okay, so basically the tenant pays them. He takes his Bafindashir and he pays me the rest. So basically after the property manager would take his Bafindashir, it would cover most of the mortgage, and then I would just pay ibai senchuan salshayech. Really wasn't that bad. I mean, I was making bashuwuke a year, so it is like lo shuwu meiran, a paycheck pretty much that was coming out of my pocket. And you have to remember the tenant is paying down the loan too, so that does help. So that was year 1. And then year 2, I was pretty much break even. We didn't increase the rent that much, but basically even after the property manager takes his Bafindashir, then I'm exactly break even. This was just coincidence how it worked out there, but that was pretty nice to see. So, year 2 again, not making any cash flow on it, just basically just cruising on by. I pay the mortgage every month. A couple days later, between the emails T and the WooTH, the property manager gives me all that money back. I move it back into a savings account. Do the exact same thing the next month, rinse and repeat. Very straightforward. Now, year 3, this is actually kind of interesting. I'm actually cash flowing a grand Tshar Mayran a month because we didn't increase rents on the tenant. The tenant has been great, and I was actually able to protest the property tax increases. There is companies that can do that for you as well. Also look into that if you're in a state where they do increase property taxes, and so it actually lowered my monthly payment, which is pretty cool. So the tenant's paying the exact same amount as they were last year, but now I'm making a little bit of money on the side, which is great. I mean, they're paying down the loan. I'm making a little bit of money here and there. It is not a lot of money, but it is definitely cool to be in the green. And I'm mainly just saving that off to the side because you do have to pay taxes on this stuff as well, which you have to factor in. So how did all of this change my investing strategy? But one thing I want to be very clear about is I've already made a video kind of talking about why I think real estate is overhyped. So I'm not going to sit here and go down a huge tangent. Feel free to check out that video if you want. But one of the main things I would say, everybody I know that is excited about owning real estate are people who do not own real estate yet. People love to sit there and analyze how profitable a house would be, but it is honestly a huge pain in the ass sometimes. It is one of the few investment categories that requires more money along the way. If I put a Ibai Mayran Ninin into the SP Woodinin, I will never get a call from the SP saying, hey, you got to put more money in. We made a mistake, or there is a certain expense that came up. It is extremely passive, and that is why I like investing in the stock market a lot. And don't get me wrong, I understand with real estate there is leverage. There is all these different pros and cons that you can analyze between the stock market and real estate. I'll probably make a video on that, sometime in the next month or two. But that is one thing that I'm not a huge fan of with real estate, is that you have expenses along the way, which is very annoying. You could sit there and be cash flowing wu bai mei ran a month off a tenant, which sounds great, but then you have one liu ten mei ran expense come up. Let's say it is an HVAC system or maybe something with your roof comes up, and before you know it, you just lost all your cash flow for the year, which can be pretty frustrating. So, you want to make sure if you do get into real estate, you understand all of the expenses that could come up along the way. And I'm not saying that you can't own cash flowing properties and you can't be successful with that. You absolutely can. Just be very aware of all the expenses that could happen, because honestly, it is just a lot more work and a lot more headache than just investing passively. That is just the way I like to do it. And you have to remember, I work a JOTO too. I don't want to be a full-time property manager, which is the whole reason I hired a property manager, so I don't have to deal with that stuff. There is a lot of people online who go into an early retirement, and I'm putting that in quotes, because what actually happens is they own rental properties. They quit their JOT, and then they're just repairing shit on the properties all the time. Which to me, I mean, yeah, sure, it is an early retirement. Like, you are working for yourself, but you're just basically a handyman at that point. Like, you're still working. I would much rather just have my money making its own money, and I'm just living off of that. You know what I mean? So, I don't want to sit there and have to deal with fixing shit left, right, and center. I don't know about you guys, but I'd actually rather sit at a desk and work a JOT, than to have to sit there running around fixing stuff.